two of the best looking grandkids I think I've ever seen. And they look at me kind of strange, why are you bragging on his grandkids? But, and they're good kids, they really are. If you're a man and you have children, pray for your children's spouse, because it works. I have two phenomenal son-in-laws. I have 3 daughters. That's all I'm gonna say. but I believe it's because we prayed for them.
There you go. Right there. Right there. No, Bill, that's good.
Anyway, Bill, I asked Bill
He's
what he
on
wanted me to
film
speak
tonight.
on. He said, well, just tell him how you got to be a preacher. Well, I went to high school with a boy named Billy Stamps, and Billy's a good friend of mine. And I used to tell him he was the resident Bible thumper, because he talked about Jesus all the time. I didn't want to hear it. I knew who Jesus was. I was baptized at the age of 12. I'm from Kentucky, and but I don't know that I actually knew Jesus. I know for a fact that I met Jesus Christ at Calvary Baptist Church at Bruce, Mississippi. Of all things, at a gospel singing. And when conviction fell, it fell hard. Because if you'd asked me, I was a Christian. I'd say I was a Christian. We got a lot of those folks out here today. But if I died, I probably went straight down. I never wanted to be a pastor. John might find this interesting, but I don't want to be a pastor today. Okay? Now that sounds strange that a pastor says that, right? Well, if you think about it, it's not that strange. If you were in the role, you'd understand that more. But I do want to make the Lord that I serve happy. I want to do something, give something back that God's given me. My wife and I married. She had met the Lord, and I met the Lord before we got married, but we were dating. And we got married in between years for X-ray school over in Tupelo. And we got to Clarksdale, Mississippi. I was going to be there for less than 2 years. I literally took a job to come back to the Mississippi Delta to be around my parents and her parents so the grandkids could know their grandparents. That was in 1985. That was my plan. God has other plans for you. I want to ask you a couple of questions today. Do you know for a fact that God's guiding you? 2, do you know that He has a plan for your life? Because He does. If you're taking in oxygen, God has a plan for your life. Now it's up to you to follow it. Okay? Now God, I've got several verses I printed out. I won't give them all tonight. Proverbs 16:9 says, we can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. I've been in the pastorate about 12 years now. The first thing I realized is God directed my path when I wasn't interested in God. I got out of X-ray school, started running the rat race and working multiple jobs and trying to make money, had 3 kids and trying to take care of them. I always wanted this one job. I sent so many resumes to the Siemens Medical Systems in New Jersey, I cut down a forest, you know. And I asked the guy that was eventually become my boss, do you not remember getting a lot of resumes from some guy in Mississippi? He said, yeah. He said, they went and filed 13 every time I got them. But I eventually got that job. You know how I got that job? I prayed for that job one time. Out of 7 years, I tried to get this job. I prayed for that job. Lord, I want this job. You know you'll give me the desires of my heart. You know how we bargain with God, and God says, you know, if you do this, God, I'll do this. And we do that. And then God does it, and we don't do it. You know how that works? A lot of people do that. So I prayed, and finally, and I was at my wit's end. I said, God, if you want me to have this job, you can give it to me. I got an interview. Now, I was pretty self-assured going to interviews with companies. You know, I got this job. I never had my palms ever get sweaty before. And in this interview, my palms got sweaty. I chose to wear a corduroy suit instead of a navy blue pinstripe suit or a better looking suit. It's a brand new suit, nice looking suit, but it was casual for it. And I get up there in this office of all these businessmen, and there I am in a corduroy suit. I mean, everything you can think of negative just started hitting me. I go back home, and a couple of people in the office up there were trying to help me get on. I flubbed that interview. I'd never flubbed an interview. Well, what happened was, I did what I told God. God, if you don't want me to have it, I'm going to try this time. If I don't get it, I'll quit trying. I quit trying. That was in August, maybe July, August of probably 1990. So I ended up, I'm doing my work at the hospital. I operated the CT scanner, doing my work, trying to keep up with taking care of the kids and the wife and the family. In February of 92, I get a phone call. Are you still interested in that job? I said, I am. He said, I need you to come up here and take some tests. Plan on spending the whole day. I took 8 hours of tests, all kinds of tests. Math test, personality test, IQ test, salesmanship test. And the position at the time I was applying for wasn't a sales job. I did eventually get sales. I mean, I spent 8 hours. And I'm like, he said, I'll call you when we get the results out. Well, a couple of weeks later, he called me. I'm going to tell you how God works. They hired me. I agreed to go to work with what I was making at the hospital because I wanted the job so bad. I get to the office of my first day. I said, what do? I'm ready to go work. I want to work. You know, I'm used to hitting the hospital and we run like salty dogs. You know, we just. So he said, go over and this is your cue. We'll go over and clean it out and I'll call you when we need you. About 10 o'clock, I'm done. I sat there from 11 o'clock, from 10 o'clock through, and we go to lunch and come back. All of a sudden, the manager, he's 6'6" and stone cold. Usually pretty good at reading people, personality-wise. He was like talking to that wall right there. Leo Seifert was the man's name, good man. He said, come here, I need to talk to you. All right, one of the test results come back and he's fixing to fire me. You know, in that chair. He starts off by saying, we don't think you realize what this job is about. Now, what does that sound like? Huh? I start to speak. I said, Mr. Seifert, he said, just listen. He said, we really don't think you understand this job like you should. He said, therefore, we're going to raise your salary by $10,000 today. I hadn't worked a day and I got a $10,000 raise. That's how God works. You know, that's how God works. I believe God gave me that job now. I believe this. I didn't believe it then. I didn't realize it then. I believe God gave me that job to do public speaking because in that position I trained, when a hospital would buy a CT scanner, I would train their personnel. I'd work with the doctors on new protocols. I'd listen, and I got to be so good talking with people, and I become what they call a hot site tech. Now, that sounds kind of, can you kind of figure out what that is? They sent me in when the customers were angry. Oh, see him dead, they'll butcher him. They didn't butcher me. And for some reason, my bosses above me listened to me. And did what I said most of the time, not all the time, but they do something similar. But so I got stuck in that one job and couldn't get into sales. I left that job and got back into sales 6 months later with the same company, with Siemens. And then God put a dissatisfaction in my heart. I walked away from a 6-figure job to go back to the hospital and work for much, much less money. Now, I ain't bragging. I think God put me through my training for public speaking. at the job, because I would speak at conferences and stuff about CT. That's how he worked in that life. Well, let me tell you how he worked when Beth, my oldest daughter, was 6 months old. We lived in New Albany before we had to move off. Something told me on a Sunday morning, 1984 in January, early January, ice was about two inches thick on the road that year, that Sunday, to get up and go to church. We lived 3 miles from Inglemar Baptist Church. I get up and I tell my wife, I said, get dressed, get the baby wrapped up real good. We're going to church down here. She said, there ain't nobody going to be at church. I said, we'll just drive down there and see, and if they are, we're going to worship with them, and then we're going to come home. We hadn't been in church. We got saved in the gospel scene. No local church took us in. We didn't seek out a local church. I was busy in school and trying to make a living, and we were busy. So we didn't go to church, but I do believe I was saved that day. That January morning, we got up and drove to that little church, and I walk in, there's a little short, dumpy guy in gray sweats, and first thing he says, and this is a point I want to make. First thing he says, I wanted to see who was foolish enough to get out in this weather to come to church. I said, I fit that bill. He and I stood in the sanctuary there, talked 10 or 15, about 45 minutes. Beth, my oldest daughter, and my wife sitting in the truck with it running for 45 minutes. The pastor was Carl White. Now, I don't know if y'all know Carl or remember Carl. Carl was at Sumner, then he come back to Clarksdale. We fell in love with Carl. He would not take no for us to come over and have lunch with him that very day. He called his wife. She fixed lunch. We went over, fell in love with him. Here's how Satan works. There was a government law called DRGs passed in 1983, implemented in January of 84. I left the hospital in New Albany to work for a private company doing CT, so I could learn CT. They had one on a tractor trailer and took it to different hospitals. They lost their contract. We joined Carl's church the next Sunday. 6 weeks from that Sunday, if I didn't move to Fort Payne, Alabama, I didn't have a job. I got a 6-month-old baby and a wife to take care of. Is that rocket science? We moved to Fort Payne. I literally took the first job come along to get back to Mississippi, which was Clarksdale. Which when Beth was born, I looked down the hallway and said, I'll never work there. Spent most of my career there. Now, that's the first time I met Carl. We start visiting churches, Clarksdale Baptist, because I worked with his aunt, 2 aunts at the hospital, Bobby and Ruby. 2 of his aunts I worked with at the hospital. I loved them. I still love them. And a lot of people went to church at Clarksdale Baptist that I knew. And so we would visit, but it just seemed like a big church, you know. We visited other churches, and there was a church in downtown Clarksdale, I believe it was called Emmanuel Baptist, over by the old hospital. We went there 2 or 3 Sundays in a row, or 6 to 8 people there. Had an old-fashioned preacher. I couldn't have told you his name back in that day. I didn't know him then. Didn't know who he was then. I've known him.
Brother Leeds.
Yep. And we show up there. I told my wife, we're going to join this little church today. She said, why? I said, these guys are 6 or 8 people. Surely, if we join them, we can try to help get people coming. You know what happened? We show up at church on time for church. The doors were padlocked. They closed the church. You know, that's kind of a slap in the face when the guy's trying to go to church, you know. They closed it. The pastor went to the Philippines. That's when Gene Williams went to the Philippines.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Gene Williams who it was.
Yeah, couldn't figure it out.
All the time working at the hospital. Well, we're going to fast forward to when we joined Clarksdale Baptist Church around 91, I think. 90 or 91. I was working every week at the Clarksdale Hospital. Every other week I one week I'd take call, and that weekend, I worked half a day Sunday, took call all weekend. The next week, I'd be off all week, but I wouldn't take call, somebody else took call, and I was off Saturday and Sunday. Had 3 kids by this time. They eat a lot. Did y'all notice that? They eat. I had girls, I thought it's gonna be nice, because girls eat so daintily. No, a girl eats you out house and home faster than a boy will. So I took a job at Oxford. On Fridays, my off week, when I didn't have to work at the hospital over in Clarksdale, I'd drive to Oxford, which I had worked at Oxford the other times. And I would clock in on Friday when I got there, and I would clock in out on Sunday at 3:30. Now the deal was, I had a room to sleep in if I could. Y'all, what's in Oxford? University. You think I ever got to sleep much on the weekend? I was the only tech there. Had to go to surgery, had to do CT, had to do x-ray. I mean, there's many days I was just going in a circle. So finally I convinced them I wanted to start going to church, and I asked her if she would change the shift on Sunday so I get off at 7. I'm driving back. Hadn't slept any that week. I called my wife, tell her get the kids ready to go to church. This is a God thing. So she gets them ready. I fall asleep 3 or 4 times driving home. Off on the shoulder, you know, and I get home, I'm slapping myself, I'm doing all these things to try to stay awake. I walk in, I tell her, I said, no, honey. I said, I got to rest. I didn't sleep all weekend. We're not going. But get me up at 4 o'clock, I need to go to Kroger's. She did. I went to Kroger's, I was still groggy. I parked my truck on the edge of the road and walked all the way across the parking lot. I got a Coke and a candy bar. I didn't know what I was going to Kroger's for. That's what I thought I was going to Kroger's for. I didn't have any idea what I said go to Kroger's. But as I come out of that store, something kept telling me, get a newspaper, get a newspaper, get a newspaper. I said, nothing in it. I ain't spending 50 cents on wasting 50 cents on a newspaper. And you know what it said back? You did for a Coke and a candy bar that you don't need. So I go all the way back across the parking lot and get a newspaper, and I'm angry at this time. Brother Carl used to call me passionate, and I told him he called me hot-headed. That wasn't an insult. I come across her almost ripping that paper apart to see what was so blasted important in that paper. Okay? Clarksdale Baptist called Carl White. Carl White. Never think somebody you meet way in the past you didn't have an effect on, and that one day God will use that to get them to come to Jesus. God used Carl White to get me back in the church. We showed up that night. They were setting up a big screen. He didn't recognize me at first, and then he turned around. He said, give me a minute, I'm putting the screen up. He turned around, he looked at me, he blinked 2 or 3 times. Dan! I said, yeah. We joined the church. I didn't want to be a pew sitter. I said, Brother Carl, I need something to do in the church. And he put me with RAs. You got all girls, you need to be with boys. And I did my penance. And I loved it. And then I taught Sunday school. One thing our churches do sometimes, they don't really know somebody when they want to ordain them to be a deacon, because they ordained me to be a deacon the year after I joined that church. They didn't know me. I really wasn't where I should have been. I did love God and I did want to please God, but I wasn't mature a Christian enough. But I had enough sense. When I got on the board with people like Guy Seltines, who was the superintendent of public schools, R.P. Lewis, I don't know if y'all know these guys or not, but there's a whole lot of Dr. Glenn Gates, Tom Barron, you know, all these guys. They in the 80s and 70s and 80s, and I look up to them. You know, I'm in my 30s. Like, what could I say on the deacon board that's going to make a difference? I sat there and listened. I learned a lot. And stayed a deacon. I was a deacon chairman when the pastor left. But before the pastor left, I'm studying my Bible, Book of John. I love the Book of John, by the way. Matter of fact, John 3:30 is what I would call my life verse. And it amazes me in the chapter 3 how many times Jesus said, love one another. Now, a little background, my grandfather was a pastor in the days before they had speakers. He left the pulpit because he was very soft-spoken and nobody could hear him. But I remember him as a kid. He passed away when I was 12. Go over his house. If I go in and he's asleep, he's in his chair and that Bible's on that chair arm. And that Bible was slap worn out. My brother was in the pastorate for 10 years. He didn't finish well, I hate to say. So that deterred me from stepping out. Now I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. We joined the church, and I want to tell you, I've had Jesus called on my life. I hope everybody here, Jesus is called on your life by the Holy Spirit. Okay? That's a calling. Other callings I've had, my girls were 4, 6, and 8. I'm sitting in the middle of that big church. It had gotten smaller by that time because I moved in there and had become active, and I fell in love with all the people there. Great people there. Bill's, I remember Mr. Bill coming in, and just great. It was a great church. I got a calling to go to Africa. And I bargained with God. You ever done that? I bargained, God, I don't want to take my girls. I love you and I trust you, but God, I don't want to take my girls to a third world country. What if they get, dysentery? What if they die over there, God? I just don't feel safe enough to go, God. You know what? I had about 1.5 years, maybe 2. It was really cold. But I knew I needed to have my children in church. And I didn't feel the Spirit. I read my Bible. It was like reading a book, just a regular book. The Word didn't speak to me. 2 or 3 years, after that, it started getting better and better and better. I had a second calling. I'm going back in the mission field. Not only was I going back, I knew exactly where I was going and knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew it was going to happen. I'm an X-ray tech. IMB had a Baptist hospital in Yemen, of all places. I'm going to Yemen for 6-month journeymanship, only 6 months. And I go and talk to Ed Lawrence, was a pastor. I said, Brother Ed, I'm going to Yemen. He said, what are you talking about? I said, I'm going to the mission field. And then he was negative about it. I never heard him be negative about anything that involves spreading the gospel. What about Charlotte? What about the girls? I said, it's only going to be 6 months, Brother Ed. Only 6 months. I'll be gone for 6 months. I'll come back home. I said, servicemen, I know men that serve on submarines stay out longer than that. He said, well, I'll help you any way I can. I'll be praying for you. So I started the process with IMB. Rejection. Oh, you got to do this. I did that. You got to do this. I did that. Hey, you got to do this. I did that. My final rejection letter said, your children are at an age where we do not recommend you going into the mission field at this time. They were teenagers. That's what I bargained for. I said, God, if you let me a little older, I'll go in the mission field. And I knew it was a real calling. I was confused. I believe God used the first calling to show me something, and the second calling to show me something. He showed me I was disobedient. You know what happened 2 months later after I got that last letter? Terrorists broke into that hospital and killed every missionary in it. I would have been there. I would have been there had everything worked like I thought it was going to work. And they closed that mission down. That's how God works. Now, I was confused for a couple of months. Brother Ed had a saying, you just keep doing what God's got you doing. And I was filling in for him for his Sunday school when he couldn't preach. But I was studying John, And light bulbs just kept going off. Me and Ed were going visiting somebody, and I said, Ed, I think God's giving me a message. I said, I don't know what for. He said, well, tell me about it. So I can't even tell you the verses, but it was the gist of loving one another. Now remember, my brother didn't finish the pastorate well. He said, well, tell me your verses, tell me how you'd approach it, tell me the points you want to make. I said, first off, I want to make, Jesus said it more than once, it's really important. He said, that's right. I said, furthermore, it is the essence of the gospel. It's one of the things we're supposed to do, and Jesus explains that because of the first two verses of the law. Love your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Okay? And your neighbor as yourself. Right? That's what Jesus said, right? I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he said. So, we're going to Oxford. He said, that would preach. About 15, 20 minutes later, he gets a little sly possum grin on his face. He looks over at me and he says, you want to preach that? I said, I can. I said, when? He said, Wednesday night at Clarksdale Baptist for the Wednesday night service. He said, I need off, and I haven't been able to find anybody to fill in. I said, I can. And I preached it. Everybody liked it. My brother called me, or I called him. He lived in Kentucky. He had started riding with a motorcycle gang, started drinking again. We're talking. He said, you know, I got asked to preach the other day. I said, did you do it? He said, no, I'm not about to do it. It's the kind of lifestyle I've been living. I ain't stepping back in that pulpit after what I've done in the last however many years since he stepped out. I said, maybe that was God trying to get you back in the pulpit. He said, nah. I said, I am not stepping in the pulpit and living like I've been living. I said, well, I preached. He said, what'd you preach on? I said, we got to love one another. Oh, he went ballistic. Now, he went ballistic. Started calling me one of them. I couldn't figure out what he's talking about. One of them what? You one of them sugar-coated preachers. I said, I ain't even a preacher. I'm just a deacon. You know? I hate to say it. I'm hard-headed. He's hard-headed. I wasn't mad, which was totally out of character for me. I didn't get angry. I kind of laughed at him. He got so mad he hung up. That was in 2008. Early November 2008. I had the inclination to call him 2 or 3 times. I regret not calling him, trying to make up. But I wasn't mad at him. I didn't figure I needed to. Well, you can call me at Thanksgiving. If you don't call me by Christmas Day, I'll call him. December 2008, December 23rd, I got a phone call from an hysterical woman on the phone. I had a woman almost dying on my CT table. I picked up the phone, I said, I'll be right back, and laid it down on the desk. Scanned that woman as fast as I could, got her back over the ER. I don't like doing codes. Okay? I don't like people dying on me. So that's what I did, and I actually forgot I'd laid the phone down. I get on the phone, the lady's so hysterical, I can't understand her. It's my niece. My brother had died. Oh, December 23rd, 2008. God directs our steps. That still small voice that you hear sometimes, don't disregard it. You never know what you're doing for Jesus Christ. Anyway, Ed left Clarksdale Baptist and the pressure cooker exploded and I was deacon chairman and I wanted the ministries he had set up to continue running. Other people in the church had an agenda. Let me tell you what, if you're a divisive person in your church, you need to get right with God. That's all I got to say. Being divisive and standing firm on an agenda that you want to push through is wrong. And I'm here to tell you, I don't believe all preachers are always right. And I believe, and I had Brother Ed a time or two, that I disagreed with him on something. But I told him I support him in whatever he decides. But I don't know that we should do that. Okay? So I'm not saying give your preacher a hard time, but sometimes You can give him what you think in a godly way, in a Christian way, and if he accepts it, fine. If he doesn't, fine. He's still your pastor. He's still the man that God called to that position. Support him. Don't be divisive. In that 9 months, I saw a lot of ugliness in the church, to the point where I could have walked away from the church. Never went back. I understand people like that. But I couldn't do it. You know why? I serve a risen Savior. God would not let me walk away. I wanted to bad. April, I don't remember what year. Carter was born 14 years ago, right? So 14 years ago was when he resigned, so it would have been the next April. I believe every Christian should have a ministry. And I had a ministry in that church. I chaperoned youth, worked with the youth. I did Sunday school. I was on the deacon boards. I'm still on the deacon boards. On the deacon board and pastor search committee board. And what happened was, I didn't get asked to teach Sunday school. Pretty much ignored when we had a board meeting, except after I got ordained. Then I was told to leave every deacon's meeting we had until the new pastor come. Church didn't know it, and if they listen to this, they'll know it now. I'm not saying this because to split the church or to hurt the church. But I had people in my face, I was laughing at them. I had another man sitting on the deacon board with me, leaned over and said, I want to go in, I believe I'm being called into the pastor. He said, but I'm not about to step out, not the way they're treating you. I said, don't worry about it. They're not upset with you, they're upset with me. And so when the new pastor come, he'd been there before. We had deacons meeting, first time since the Ed had left that I had not heard, you need to leave. First time. And I knew what was coming. At the end, the deacon meeting went well, and wasn't any arguing, anything. I had a man come up out of his chair to go across the table after these guys. And I patted him on the leg, I said, sit down, this ain't nothing. They can't make me leave. New preacher called me in the office and he said, I said, I need to see you in the office after deacon meeting. I said, okay. I knew what was coming. He said, they tell me you've been ordained and that you're preaching at another church. I said, yes, sir. That's Union Chapel, 9 a.m. Sunday mornings. I'm a member here. I come here for worship. I'm on the deacon board. I'm on the pastor search committee board, if you remember. He said, yeah, I remember that. He said, don't you think you need to move your membership? I said, yes, sir, I do. He said, what? I said, yes, sir, I do. He said, well, when are you going to move it? I said, I'm going to move it when God tells me and not any other man. Not a man. I'm not moving it when man tells me, but when God tells me to move my membership, I'll move it. You know what he said? He said, oh, okay. Not another word. Didn't hear another word.